Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Natalie Graves. I'm chair of the Entrepreneurship Committee here at the Cave Hill campus. And today I would like to warmly welcome you to our panel discussion. Our panel discussion is going to be titled The Ethics, Ownership, and Legacy of Museum Creation. And this panel is occurring as a side event to the Caribbean Agency for Public Health, Caribbean Public Health Agency's annual conference, as well as the inaugural launch of the Cecil Cyrus Caribbean Museum of Medical History. At CCC, if you want to remember it, MMH. And we are just thrilled to have a panel of experts joining us here today. And I just want to invite you to think critically, to engage, and to be prepared to ask questions as needed. At this point in time, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Heather Harewood, who is head of public health here at the Faculty of Medical Sciences.
Thank you so much, Dr. Graves. Good afternoon, everyone. So at this time, we will move smartly along and invite our dean, Dr. Damien Kohal, to deliver remarks. And I will go on to introduce the panel thereafter.
Good afternoon, everyone. It would be remiss of me not to, of course, pass on greetings to the distinguished panel, our special invited guests, who are also a part of the panel, our very esteemed retired professor of history, Alain Cobley, who certainly has a lot to say coming out of the panel, I presume, on the topic of today's discussion. Next to him, of course, is, my esteemed colleague, who I became acquainted with, having done some work with the Decolonizing the Archive group in the United Kingdom, Miss Connie Bell, who I'm quite sure will have a lot to say and provide food for thought in today's panel discussion. And moving along, just to identify and welcome my other faculty colleagues, senior lecturer in anatomy, Dr. Keerti Singh, our lecturer in pathology, Alain, Reid, and last but not least, our lecturer in surgery, who should have a few things to say about medical museums and some of the created art that we find in such museums. So welcome, panelists. It would also be remiss of me not to welcome my fellow dean from the Faculty of Medical Sciences, St. Augustine campus, Dean Harry, who is here with me. Dean Tame is also here, but I assume she is busy at the CARFA conference, and we took the opportunity of having this panel discussion during 12 to 1 lunchtime, open to attract some of our colleagues from CARFA, but we know how time challenging or schedule challenging that could be in terms of movement between both sides. But nevertheless, we're happy to have our panel discussion being recorded, so there would be opportunities for it to be broadcast to persons who may not be able to watch it live in person. So on this occasion, where we will be launching the Cecil Cyrus Caribbean Museum of Medical History, CCCMMH, as noted by Dr. Graves, the Faculty of Medical Sciences, KVL, intends to cultivate within your minds, our audience and panelists, these concepts of ethics, proprietorship, and legacy in the panel discussion entitled Ethics, Ownership, and Legacy of Museum Creation. The panel discussion will agitate conscious Caribbean thought on the issue of creation of our heritage. This is something that we don't do well in the Caribbean at all. We are possibly the most diverse region in the world, according to fauna, flora, and I suspect diversity among our various ethnicities and races. And all our ancestral linkages unpack a lot of heritage that we hardly see created in a way which is the meaning of that historical legacy. So we want to cultivate those thoughts. We want to discuss those thoughts today. We believe that this panel discussion is the perfect opportunity for us to engage on these serious topics as we launch our medical museum. And we suspect that upon hearing these thoughts being ventilated in this space, it will put us in the right frame of mind as we indulge the museum, the creation in the museum, the tours of the museum, and other events aligned with today's panel discussion. Tomorrow, we will have a very important public lecture, and this will be delivered again by my esteemed colleague from the United Kingdom, Ms. Connie Bell, who will be speaking about the curation of Caribbean heritage. So all of these discussions, lectures, launch, they are linked. And our connection to that heritage as a segue to the future. In order, and I've always said, I said the same thing at Carrefour yesterday, in order to move forward, you really have to know your past, right? So you have to set a baseline or platform. So as I would have described, our panel includes a multidisciplinary team, and you will find experts in ethics who will be able to speak to ethics, embryology and anatomy, pathology, and heritage creation. We anticipate that the discussion will capture the views of the panelists on ethical parameters governing creation of medical artifacts, propriety issues, and legacy. We'll be talking a lot about the legacy of Sir Cecil in the launch this afternoon or this evening. The public lecture which follows the launch will dwell into that very serious matter I raised, and I'm quite sure Ms. Connie Bell will be able to do that justice. And just to say a little bit about Ms. Connie Bell, because she's probably the most unknown person on the panel outside of the other panelists. But Ms. Bell is a UK-based, and I said, Connie, my apologies if I got this wrong, cultural practitioner, but she's more importantly the co-founder of the Decolonizing the Archive, and she will speak to that, and also the University of Repair. As a consultant, memory worker, and I may be given the bio that you're supposed to give, Heather, but that's fine, all right? But as a consultant, memory worker, and a cultural producer, her work explores decolonial methodologies and memory as technology within archives. So Connie will be exploring the creation of Caribbean heritage in a lot more detail in our public lecture tomorrow. But I hope that everyone who's tuning in live, in person, and when we rebroadcast this panel discussion will be edified with the knowledge that is shared today. So colleagues, thank you again for attending, and I look forward to the panel discussion. Cheers. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dean Cohol, and thanks for making my job that much easier. So I will just give a very brief overview to our panel, and we've heard of the esteemed work that they've done. So I'll just go from my left. So Dr. Desiree Skeet, she's the moderator for this afternoon, so after I leave, she'll be the person in charge of everything. She's a lecturer in anatomical pathology at the UWI campus, and she graduated from our program in 2000 and completed her DM in anatomical pathology at the UWI Mona in 2007, and a fellowship in surgical pathology, cytopathology, and immunohistochemistry from the University of Toronto in 2009. Professor Alain Cobley is Professor Emeritus of History at the University of the West Indies, CAFIL. He is the author, editor, or co-editor of 13 books and numerous articles, book chapters, and technical reports. But I think most recently he's been acknowledged for his recent publication, along with Dr. Henderson Carter, Today in Bajan History, the Almanac, Volume 1, which was published in November 2004. Professor Cobley has been a member of the editorial board of the Journal of Caribbean History since 2002 and was recently appointed acting editor of the Journal of the Barbados Museum and Historical Society. He has moved through the ranks at the University of the West Indies, but remarkable achievements included his promotion through the ranks to become Professor of South African and Comparative History in 2001, and he has served in various administrative capacities as well, including head of department and also director of the School of Education. We then have Ms. Connie Bell, who was introduced so ably by the Dean, but I just want to make a note that a part of her work will also be looking at a pathway for future exploits in the development and curation of Caribbean relics that are concerning health and welfare of us as Caribbean people. We then have Dr. Keerti Singh, who's a senior lecturer in anatomy in the Faculty of Medical Sciences at the UWI Cave Hill, and she serves as the Phase 1 coordinator. She completed her MBBS and MS in anatomy from the Delhi University in India. She serves as a review editor for the journal Frontiers in Public Health, Education, and Promotion, and is visiting professor in the Balaji Medical College and Hospital, Chennai, India. Dr. Singh is an honorary fellow of the Global Association of Physicians of Indian origin, and she's also a member of the Optimist, so she does have a lot of community work. And I think, in our discussions, we need to think about what we're doing in terms of curation and promoting the interactions with communities and building our legacy together within the communities. We then have Dr. Alain Reid, who received his MBBS from the University of the West Indies in 2008. And you notice the trend here. We have people who are trained within our setting, and I think that is a moment of pride for us as well. And he did his DM training in pathology also at UWI and graduated in 2015. He practiced as a consultant pathologist in the private sector from 2015 to 2019. He is currently the chair of the Tercentenary Redevelopment Advisory Committee and is involved in the Cecil Cyrus Museum project. We then have Dr. Margaret O'Shea, last but by no means least, who completed her training in general surgery in 2006 from the UWI Cave Hill and a Doctor of Medicine in General Surgery. She went on to undertake fellowship training in Australia in renal transplantation, and she returned to the hospital in 2009 and was promoted to consultant general surgeon and renal transplant surgeon. Dr. O'Shea was head of department in surgery, and she joined us in the faculty in 2016 as a lecturer in surgery. So we have a breadth of knowledge here, and we really do look forward to have you delve into the various aspects as we look at curation and the implications for us as a society. So over to you, Dr. Skeet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hayward, for those detailed introductions. So good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome. Again, I am Dr. Desiree Skeet, your moderator for today's session. Medical museums that display human remains and images navigate a tightrope between being exploitative and informative. Our distinguished panelists today will help us dissect this multifaceted set of questions surrounding that opening statement in terms of who has ownership and the interpretation and the cultural and the scientific heritage and significance of these items that are housed in these museums. And as well, extrapolating from that, what kind of legacy do we leave for our future generations? Firstly, in this panel discussion, we will have our experts each give an uninterrupted perspective of the topic from their viewpoint. This will be followed by a question and answer session in which I invite members of the audience. You can participate. I will certainly be asking the panelists some questions as well. And after that, we will have a brief summary, which I will do, and the vote of thanks will wrap up the session. We anticipate a stimulating, thought-provoking discussion today. Hence, we will now begin with the historical perspective with Professor Cobley. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Madam Moderator. And thank you to the Dean and his team for inviting me. I thought before I said anything else, I wanted to say a special thank you to all the people who brought the collection here to Barbados, who were instrumental in that. Of course, Lady Catherine Cyrus in the first place, who made the donation, Emeritus Professor Sir Henry Fraser, the medical deans, of course, Peter Adams and Damien Cohall, Professor Landis as principal, who was a driving force in bringing it here. But I also wanted to mention the critical work of the appraisal team who went to St. Vincent to look at the collection and to advise us on what needed to be done to bring it here. And that included Dr. Skeet, who's with me, Halcyon Wiltshire-Busby, who's also here, and Anne Bancroft from the museum. So I want to thank them for the work that they did. Now, in my remarks, I want to give a brief history of how the collection came into being and how it came to Cave Hill. And then in the latter part, I want to talk a little bit about some of the ethical issues that arose during the process. And I'm telling you this from the perspective of my role as chair of the feasibility committee, which looked at bringing the collection here and how it could be brought about. I should say I've written my remarks down. As you heard, I'm now retired, and there's a danger when I get into my anecdotage we could be here for hours. So I've written down in the hope I'll keep it concise. Okay, so if we talk about the Cyrus collection, we must start with Dr. Sir Cecil Cyrus. Dr. Cyrus was a true pioneer in Caribbean medicine. Born in St. Vincent in 1929, he went to Queen's University in Belfast in 1950, where he became the first Vincentian to qualify as a surgeon, and he was also the first Vincentian to become a Fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons. He was appointed as consultant surgeon to the Colonial Hospital in St. Vincent in 1963. And for many years, he was the only trained surgeon in the island. And he spent much of his career as a doctor battling with shortages of trained staff, equipment, and other facilities to do his job. Through it all, he was driven by an unshakable determination to improve the lives of his patients. And in his efforts to restore health and dignity to his patients, who were affected by a wide range of disfiguring tumors and sores, he took on the work of many different specialists, broadening his areas of expertise by attaining additional diplomas in ophthalmology and obstetrics. He opened his own private hospital in St. Vincent in 1976, and over the next 25 years, he began creating this unique collection of medical specimens, photographs, and case files, which documented the diverse medical challenges presented to him by his patients and the innovative treatments and equipment he developed in response. After his retirement in 2001, he converted his clinic into the Dr. Cecil Cyrus Museum to display his collection. The Sir Cecil Cyrus collection, therefore, not only represents the life's work of one of the Caribbean's outstanding surgeons, it provides a fascinating insight into the historical development of medicine in the Caribbean in the 20th century. Dr. Cyrus died in March of 2023 at the age of 94. So, how did the collection come to UWI? It was Dr. Cyrus's expressed wish that the collection should find a home at the University of the West Indies in Barbados so it could be preserved for posterity, but also so that it could be available as a resource to the people of the Eastern Caribbean. That was important for him. The idea was first broached by Professor Sir Henry Fraser in 2007 to the then principal Sir Hilary Beckles about acquiring the collection here. And in April 2007, Anna Doty, curator of the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia, accompanied by Alessandra Cummins from the Barbados Museum and Historical Society, went to St. Vincent to view the collection. And in her report, Doty called the collection unique and noteworthy and strongly recommended the acquisition by the university. The main issue in acquiring the collection at that time, as it often is, was money. The value of it was put at several $100,000 EC dollars. And after some discussion, it was decided the campus couldn't afford it. However, following the passing of Dr. Cyrus in 2023, Lady Cyrus expressed her willingness to donate the collection to Cave Hill. And through the good offices of Emeritus Professor Sir Henry Fraser, a donor was found who was willing to cover the shipping costs to bring the collection here. Now, I won't go into all the logistical issues, of which there are many. We can talk about that if you were interested. But actually, Desiree knows more about that than I do. Now, I want to get on to ethical concerns. When the feasibility committee was considering whether to recommend the collection be acquired and brought to Barbados, several issues arose. Initially, there was some unease about the whole idea of putting specimens of human remains on display at all. What value would such an exhibit have in Barbados? Now, clearly a case could be made from the perspective of medical research. But was it possible to display the specimens in a manner that was respectful of the patients from whom the specimens were collected? Should the exhibit be open only to doctors and medical students, or should the public be allowed to view it as well? And if so, under what conditions? How could we avoid upsetting potential viewers of the collection who had never seen some of the abnormalities that afflicted human beings before? Or, alternatively, avoid turning the entire exhibit into some sort of freak show? In considering these questions, we drew on the experience of other medical museums, such as the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia and the Hunterian Museum at the Royal College of Surgeons in London. We also reviewed articles on the ethical debates raised at these and other institutions. We sought the advice of Dr. Campbell and the Institutional Review Board, and also the advice of the Barbados Museum and Historical Society. The key question was it possible to display human remains in Barbados in a way that was educational, respectful, and properly contextualized? This has often proved to be a challenge in other countries because many of the specimens in those collections were acquired in highly dubious circumstances, for example, by colonial administrators or colonial medical officers who were motivated by and seeking to prove racist assumptions about their colonial subjects. They didn't need to seek permission to take specimens and generally didn't bother to ask. The most egregious example that comes to mind, and you know I'm a South Africanist, so this is why it comes to mind for me, is that of Sarah Baartman, the so-called Hottentot Venus. She was a Khoi woman from South Africa who was taken to Europe in the early 19th century to be put on display there as a curiosity. After she died in Paris in December 1815, she was dissected by Georges Cuvier, who is said to be the father of comparative anatomy. He wanted to investigate what he believed to be her peculiar racial characteristics. And subsequently, her skeleton and a plaster cast of her body were put on public display, and they were still there in the Museum of Man in Paris up to 1982. Eventually, after a long legal battle, the remains were returned to South Africa, though the jars containing her brain and genitalia were never found. She was buried in after a state funeral in South Africa in August 2002. Now, of course, the story of Sarah Baartman is an extreme case. But displaying human remains is still controversial today. As recently as 2024, last year, Anna Dodi, who you remember appraised the Cyrus collection in 2007, resigned as curator of the Mutter Museum after the College of Physicians in Philadelphia decided to take down all the educational videos and online exhibits she had created. Dr. Myra Irons, the CEO of the college, which owns the Mutter Museum, said the decision was in an effort to make sure that our online presence is respectful and appropriate. When physicians look at the specimen, she said, they see patients, and we can contextualize the stories of those patients in our minds as we're going through it. It's kind of natural for us. But, she argued, for other museum visitors, that holistic view may be more elusive. Unless you have that subject matter expertise to contextualize it, we have to do it for you, meaning the museum. It's not hard, but I think it's an extra step, and I think it'll make the experience better. So, with all of that in mind, at the end of our cogitations as a committee, we made several recommendations with regard to how the material should be treated. And I can list them briefly. Firstly, since the collection consisted of medical specimens and other related materials, we felt it was extremely important that it be held in a medical facility. There was some talk about having a separate museum somewhere else and so on. But we felt it had to be in a medical facility where the issue of patient confidentiality could be fully understood and respected. So that was the first thing. Secondly, as far as possible, it was necessary to investigate whether patient permissions had been obtained for retention of particular specimens. Although it was noted by our team when they visited that Sir Cecil had a disclaimer in his museum that all the patients had given consent to having their photos and their body parts and so on display. So there was that general disclaimer, but we thought that it was necessary perhaps to dig a little deeper than that. In any event, it was important, this is the third point, to ensure that personal identifiers should be removed from all its specimens and photographs before display. So there should be no way to identify the person. Fourth, there were specific items which needed special attention, and we listed them. There was a set of human skeletal remains, there was a box of human bones, there was a complete human brain. We felt that they needed to be thoroughly investigated as to how they had been acquired, and failing a satisfactory response, they should be handed over to the authorities in St. Vincent for burial. Finally, and this is a bit off on another direction, the collection contains whale bones, which are the spine of a whale, which I gather were used by Sir Cecil to demonstrate how the spine worked and so on. But you need special permission to take whale bones from one place to another, from one country to another. So that was a thing that required special treatment. So those were the kind of the basic things that came up in our discussion. But I want to finish with one additional recommendation, which I think is particularly important to consider as we prepare to open the museum to the public. To avoid some of the pitfalls I've mentioned, the specimens placed on display must be properly contextualized. For example, by using supportive information panels for the benefit of the general public. People need to view the exhibits with empathy in the end, and that's the important thing. They need to feel the humanity in them and not to see them merely as objects. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Cobley, for those comments. Now we will ask Dr. Singh, the anatomist, to give her perspective.
Thank you so much, Dr. Skeet. Thank you, Professor Cobley, for that lovely presentation and giving a historical perspective to this efforts of museum curation. I would like to, first of all, say that though I was trained in India as an anatomist, I'm very grateful to the university for giving me the chance to actually practice the process of museum curation while we were preserving and transporting the specimens. And I also want to thank my colleagues in UW Mona. I know UW Mona has a very strong history of seniority, and that is my seniors in anatomy, with whom I discussed before I went to St. Vincent and Grenadines. I took those advisors, especially in terms of how to preserve those specimens and what chemicals should be used. All that was shared from my seniors, which were there at UW Mona. So I'm really grateful to them and thankful to the university for this practical experience, and also having worked at the site where Cecil, Dr. Cyrus, would have actually worked with his specimens. So that was a very, very, out-of-the-world experience. I'm very grateful for that. I think very few of anatomists would have such an original experience. So going back to my presentation, I would just focus mostly on the ethics related to the human specimens and what are the rules, regulations which should be practiced in curation. While the subject of museum curation is pretty old, it ages back long time, but the role of ethics and the legalities associated with this process is quite recent. And ethics and the rules have been reviewed regularly at a more recent basis, right? So there are laws governing this process for the display of human remains. And the first act which came into being, it was in 1970 by the UNESCO Convention, and the ICOM, that is the International Council of Museums, the Code of Ethics was formed for responsible museum collection and management. And this was followed, and most of the institutions or the museums refer to these regulations which are managed by the ICOM. And following this, the Human Tissue Act was formed in 2004 in UK that regulates the acquisition, care, and display of the human remains. So mostly all the ethics and the regulations with regards to human remains, we refer to the Human Tissue Act, which was established in 2004. Generally, all the institutions must assess the historical, and cultural and spiritual significance of this collection. So a great emphasis should be placed behind what is the history, what is the cultural significance from where these specimens have been retained. And ethical guidelines place a very strong emphasis on giving due respect and dignity to these collections, or the legacy collections, which we call now at our museum. So also giving a lot of respect to the descendant communities. What is the meaning of descendant communities? Is the communities which belong, or the descendants of the person who would have donated towards these legacy collections. So due respect and dignity should be given to not only the specimen, but also the descendants of the person whose the tissue belongs. I would like to connect the 4 pillars of ethics. We know that in medical practice, the 4 pillars of ethics play an important role in medical practice, but also in museum curation, this plays an important role. So the first pillar is autonomy. So how does autonomy come to play in museum curation? So the individual has the right to make decisions about their own body. So even in the process of curation, we know that informed consent plays a very important role when the person makes a decision that I want to donate or bequeath my body for museum curation, or as a specimen to be stored as a legacy collection in the museum, or he makes a decision that the way I want my body to be disposed, whether I want it to be buried or want to be cremated, depending on the religion of that individual. So that's where autonomy comes to play. The next pillar is beneficence. Beneficence means causing no harm. We know that the museums have a moral obligation to the society and also for playing common good. That is, it plays a very important role in education for the society. Right? Education not only for the medical students, but also for the education of the general society, that is the community, as well as the students which are there, school students. So playing a good role, and also it has an important role in good scientific research. So the museum collections can be used for good scientific research as well. So that's where the role of beneficence comes. And the third pillar is non-maleficence, which means not to cause any harm, any physical or mental or harm to any property, right? So this pillar comes to play when during acquisition, storage, and display of the museum collection. So everything should be done as per the wishes of the person who has donated the body, and also according to the cultural and the spiritual beliefs of that person. If you're not following that, you're causing a harm, a moral harm to the person. So very strict focus should be played on this, so that we do not, cause any harm or go against the cultural beliefs of that individual. So we should go as per the wishes, the religious or the cultural norms of the deceased. And the fourth pillar is justice. So justice means to give equal importance to both, that is the benefit as well as the challenges which would arise during museum curation. The next step goes towards the acquisition of the specimens of the museum curation. Sorry, I'll just have a small overview. Just wanted to, so my 4 pillars of ethics I have spoken. Beyond this, I just wanted to emphasize the role of acquisition, process of acquisition of the museum specimens. So it is it is a very transparent process where the institution has a direct consultation along with the persons in the community from where the museum specimens have been acquired. So there has to be a transparency process, and the local experts should also be involved in this process, right? So it should not be that we don't know what is happening and it is not according to the local community or the descendant community or the general country from where the specimens have been acquired. So it should be a transparent process, and it should be according to the rules and regulations. So ethics play a very important role, and also the culture of the individual from where, to whom the specimens belong play a very important role. So I'd just like to end at that note that sometimes ethical dilemmas come into play. And I also want to add a small note about the Hunterian Museum, right? So Hunterian Museum is in Hungary, and this was acquired by Hunter brothers, William Hunter and John Hunter. And most of the specimens which are acquired in such museums, mostly the consent was not taken from the individuals at that time. So that's why I say that the museum curation process is old, but the ethics is new. Right? So this is the process which we are following now. So we need to be mindful of that and follow what the regulations are there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Singh, for zeroing in on some of the pillars of ethics. Now we will hear the anatomical pathology perspective from Dr. Reid.
Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. Right, so thank you, Dr. Singh, for that comprehensive overview. I too believe that when looking at the tenets for the ethical basis of medical museums, that you should look at it as an extension of the principles of the doctor-patient relationship. And I believe that this should be indefinite. And our role as pathologists really is as the custodians of patient specimens. And we follow on from that, even in death. And we also understand the importance of education. As a matter of fact, in some autopsy rooms, at the very top, you see that the dead learn from the living. The living learn from the dead, right? So with respect to how we respect autonomy for patients that are alive, of course, consent, right, should be given. This consent should be informed consent. The process of consent should be transparent. In those cases where consent cannot be given, the museum should have a detailed account of the acquisition process and the cultural context in which the specimen was obtained, and any breach of conduct that wouldn't have applied at that time, so that we can see how we've been able to bridge the gap moving forward and fix our mistakes. So with respect to confidentiality, labeling of the specimens. So labeling of the specimens should exclude any patient identifiers, and they should follow the patient identifiers outlined in HIPAA standards. And labeling should be simple. It should provide time, okay, in terms of date, and it should provide a number. And this could be just a numerical number followed by the date. And then in terms of the context is important. So therefore, every specimen should have a context. And that context should bear in mind what you're trying to educate the person on in terms of the pathology, but also the human side, okay? And therefore, as Dr. Singh, focus on the empathy and the cultural context from which that specimen came. Who was that patient? Who were the descendants? Where did they come from? What did they think? And how that, and that should be a part of what the labeling. So the patient, the persons visiting the museum should be able to see both the person and the specimen, right? And we are responsible for protecting the specimens, okay? So we do no harm. So therefore, in terms of the fixation process, it should be well documented and it should be standardized. The restoration process should also be well documented and should be standardized. And there's no issue with educating persons on what process was used. So that is what we do as custodians. Now, of course, these specimens take on a physical form, but we live in a modern world, so there is digital. And therefore, we need to consider that, okay? And the same principles of confidentiality and of autonomy have to be considered if there is any digital form of those specimens, right? And then at a local level, we can put our guidelines in place, but these things need to be enacted into law, and therefore it is our responsibility to push to have our own Human Tissues Act, which would govern what we do for future collections within our Caribbean Medical Museum. And I would take any questions following.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Reid. And now we will ask Dr. Margaret O'Shea to give her perspective as lecturer in surgery and transplant surgeon.
Thank you, Dr. Skeet. How many of us think about what we want to happen to our bodies after we die? I don't think it's something, especially the younger you are, you don't think about it. But there's so much benefit we're hearing now, not only for the museum, but for me as a transplant surgeon, there's so much benefit to organs. Can save so many lives. Up to 10 organs can be transplanted, not to mention tissue. And I think hearing the speakers, it's something more and more, and maybe the museum will foster this in our culture. What do we want to happen to our bodies after we die? Do we want to go in the ground, get eaten up by worms, be of no use to anybody? Or transplant, but not only that, having specimens dissected, teaching medical students, understanding our own anatomy. This is all very important as in modern medical practice. And we heard about beneficence. Everything about donation is for good. And I think even though there's concerns about Barbadians don't like to donate, they want to go in the ground hole. There was a study by Professor Adams and Professor Morgan from the UK comparing kidney transplantation, attitudes to transplantation between Barbados and the UK. And majority of the persons interviewed were happy to donate after death. Maybe living, we have concerns. But after death, they want something good to happen. The only thing was the distrust of the doctors. So I think I'm hearing a lot about people having concerns about confidentiality and how it will be displayed and what's the context. I think it's something that we need to address. Trust in the medical institution that we will do everything we can to preserve life. But of course, after death, we can have benefit. And there is a Tissue Transplant Act laid in Parliament to be debated in Barbados at some point. There is one active in Trinidad and passed in Guyana, but not yet in Barbados, so I hope that will come. But in the absence of writing a living will, which is really not fully in law here either, but the Act does acknowledge relatives saying what they want to happen to their bodies. So your family will be approached as so much as when the Act is passed. So have that conversation from now. You know, I say I don't want my body dissected by the medical students, but other than that, anything can happen. As far as donating any part of my organs for life-saving procedures, I'm only joking. If in medical students, no problem. But then, you know, we can have organs being displayed, and I think this is really important going forward. So for me, as a person who will be dealing with living patients, not necessarily museum, but I would love to tour it, I think it's important to understand that there's a lot of benefit to quote-unquote dead person, and be it for living people or also for education purposes. So have that thought in your mind and tell your family, even if you don't write it down. I have a little donor card I walk around with that hopefully, you know, in my lifetime we get the law, but this is what I want, and I really hope everybody else thinks about this benefit going forward. That's for me. I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And after those 4 diverse perspectives, now we go into our keynote speaker or guest speaker, Ms. Bell, and she will speak about museum curation practice. Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Wonderful to be here in Barbados. You're living the life. All right, so I'm going to first kind of introduce it from a standpoint of where I'm coming from. So I'm living in London, but as you can hear, I have my strong accent. So I've been living in London forever, but I didn't lose my accent when my mom migrated to England. And I would always travel forward and backward, you know, between. But the point of that, why I bring it up, is because it is very important that as a person doing things from a cultural perspective, that you know what that looks like. You're at such a pivotal moment right now doing this Cecil Cyrus Museum. It's such a fantastic opportunity for you as Barbadians to take ownership of a medical narrative that the rest of the world is not doing. You are also at a pivotal point because when it comes to the idea of decolonization and what that actually looks like, as opposed to what an academic approach might tell you decolonization is, you are at a point where you are in a space geographically that has mixed together, as Damien mentioned in our conversation earlier, many different cultures, married together, tethered through various experiences of colonization. And you are now at this wonderful moment where you can actually share a legacy of what that looks like on the ground. Now, medically, we have seen that a lot of unethical issues has taken place in regards to medical science. Wonderful panelists have shared with you and elucidated on the various histories in regarding to that, especially dealing with the Cecil Cyrus collection that you're looking at. So the idea is that you are going to be approaching things from how do we correct the collection of these items. The new idea and conversation and dialogical discourse that needs to be introduced into the space and into your museum curation ideas is presenting an opportunity where the community and the medical students and the medical experts are in one space together, holding conversation and sharing this knowledge. The idea is that you move from a point of hierarchy in regards to knowledge sharing. A big part of the ethical issue that needs to be introduced is that there's too much barrier. There's too many barriers in regards to knowledge sharing and knowledge building. If you are truly to move forward in terms of an ethical discourse, then the idea is that you're going to introduce the community in where they actually are the ones that take ownership. But even more so, you as experts in the medical field stand back and give them an opportunity to give their findings in regards to what they see as logical and illogical. You can then bring in your science to then underpin certain things and say, well, actually, if that was to work, this. So in other words, the shift then takes place, where instead of you speaking to people as if you're the only ones that have the answers, you are inviting the community in. Now, why is that important? If you are to move past the colonial structure and that whole colonial pyramid of how things are approached, where I know more than you, this is the only way that we're going to, to disrupt that approach. Now, in regards to the kind of work that we do at Decolonizing the Archive, we have a program on presently that's currently taking place in Parliament in Britain, where we are also tackling the idea of human remains. How we've moved forward to a certain degree is we have introduced this concept of ancestral remains, ethical enablers. Now, why ancestral remains? Because these are our ancestors. Our ancestors, as rightfully as Dr. Singh has mentioned, have left stories and narratives for us to learn on. Now, whether those ancestors had permission, were asked permission to leave that history with the rest of the world, that is where the dialogical discourse takes place, and that is where the ethical part starts to come in. How do we rectify the past, but also fortify the future? So it's about you as medical students and medical experts sitting here and actually agreeing to solve that problem. Not moving as an individual, not moving as a single organization, or living in silo in regard to the issues, in regard to the ethical issues of our bodies. The reason why many of the communities that we've researched on the Decolonizing Archive, especially in England, have not been participating with medical sciences is because of the horrors that have happened to them over the many years. So therefore, there is no relationship to regard safety, yeah, safeguarding their protection, because as far as their memory, yeah, as far as their memory is concerned, what their grandmother or their grandfather told them, you cannot trust the medical sciences. Secondly, how are you approaching your patients? Walter Rodney's wife, Dr. Walter Rodney, who's, as you know, was assassinated, his wife and himself also were in Grenada for a large part. I would strongly suggest that you read the work of Dr. Patricia Rodney and what she found while working in Grenada. While working in Grenada and working with women and working with a lot of the community, she realized that a lot of the diagnoses that were being given out was under a Eurocentric structure of how to approach the body. As we know, much of what you've learned is under a Eurocentric structure. So it's also about unpacking which part of that do I start to interrogate. How do I now renegotiate the knowledge that I've learned under the schooling and scholarship that I've learned, yeah? And it's about creating those spaces. So if this museum is to be transformative, if this museum is to bring forth something very new, yeah, not only for the century, but for this entire region, and then a representative to the world, then you must hold spaces that convene both a conversation, a dialogical discourse, and exchange in radical change towards medical science and how things are approached. That's it for me for now. If you want to hear more, come later. Thanks. Take care.
Okay, thank you very much for that contribution. Okay. And now we will go into the question and answer session. For members of the audience, you can simply put your hand up and I will give you the chance to voice your question. Okay, we already have one. Yes. Please stand and identify yourself.
Thanks for this wonderful panel opinions. I was very curious about this whole museum to be open to public, and you said that it is going to be predominantly medical students and medical personnel. But if it is going to be open to public, we need to be very careful because I was in these usual Zoom meetings with the background of my Faculty of Medical Sciences, which marketing and communication shared with me. Now, without my knowledge, I had it, and then the marketing communication director calls me and, she's panicking. She's saying, Prof. Hari, how can you have that background? There were just 2 bottles, the laboratory bottles with blood and a syringe, and she couldn't take it. That's what I'm saying. And she said that this is going to be really problematic to people who are non-medicos when you have a background with blood in the bottles and a syringe with some blood and all that. That opened my eyes, actually. So I'm thinking that, something like this, if we have to be open to public, we have to be extremely careful as to what we want to display, how we are going to educate them before they come in, and what they must learn from this. And also, I don't know, the colonial things, I'm very, all the fathers, fathers of comparative anatomy, somebody you said, and then the fathers of gynecology, Sim Speculum. We know that, how he operated on slaves without anesthesia, and, wanted to see, how hysterectomy, everything, So every father is in the past, father of medicines in that particular field, have developed something or other, and we must know this, and our own medical students must be aware of how these things happen, for them to be, much more conscious of what they should not do. So those type of things can be part of the museum, but displaying pathology specimens and anatomy specimens to common public, we need to be a little careful in that, and that was the point I want to make. Thank you.
Could I respond?
Yeah.
That's an excellent point. And whilst I'm agreeing with you, I think the whole idea is to recognize also that it's a conversation. So when introducing things to the public, one idea could be to make a disclaimer. You make a disclaimer that puts it to the audience, do I want to come to a place that's going to have show me blood? In that way, again, you remove that barrier, you remove that hierarchical approach that maybe they can't handle it, because maybe there are some that can, and those that can will be wanting to come to be introduced. Other such suggestions could be possibly to align that within a particular space that is curtained. Those who wish to go and look at it can go and have a look, in the same way when we go to a funeral, and I'm sure not one person in here has not been to a funeral, but if you haven't, for those of you who haven't, the funeral, you have a choice whether you want to go and see the deceased or not. Yeah.
I think there's a very important question. In fact, Ms. Bell was really referring to it right through, and that is, who is the museum for? Now, one answer to that question, I think for Sir Cecil, might have been for the people of St. Vincent. And unfortunately, it's no longer there. But in order for us to bring it to Barbados, we had to get a letter from the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Honourable Ralph Gonzalez, saying he is giving permission on behalf of the people, government of people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to bring it here, under the understanding that it would be dealt with in a respectful and appropriate manner, and that it would remain accessible to Vincentians. But having brought it here, that question about, should the public be exposed to this stuff and so forth, I think the answer is yes. But I mean that's a discussion. One of the things we discussed in the committee was, well, what about school kids? Should school kids be allowed to see this stuff? And again, the answer, broadly speaking, we came up with was yes, provided the displays and the exhibits are presented in an appropriate manner so that they can engage with them without freaking, on the other hand, without laughing. That they understand that this is something important to engage with, and it's an aspect of humanity that they're looking at. So I think that is important. But I wanted to as the conversation was going on, I was thinking about Newton Slave Plant Cemetery. The Newton Slave Cemetery, for those of you who don't know, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The most complete slave cemetery in the Western Hemisphere, absolutely fundamentally important site. It was, when it was first excavated, one of the archaeologists, an American archaeologist, packed up one of the skeletons in a box and took it with him to the States so that he could show it to his students, pull it out like a rabbit out of a hat, I guess, in classes and show them. The museum, when they got wind of this, wrote to him and said, you can't do that. Send it back. Send the skeleton back. So it eventually did come back, I think by FedEx or something, in a box with all the bones all jumbled and broken up. Fast forward to recent times. The government of Barbados decided that they would make the Newton Slave Cemetery a feature to celebrate partly the connection with Africa and so forth. So they're creating what is called the Newton Heritage, or what's it, the Newton Heritage District? I think that's what they're calling it, of which the slave cemetery will be a central piece. And they sent in, and they decided they were going to build a visitor center and all of the things and so forth. So in a great rush to get this done, they sent in the bulldozers to build a car park and to start laying out. And they sent the bulldozers into the cemetery and did irreparable damage to that archaeological site. And the question really came up again. Who is this being done for? One of the answers that I heard from the Minister of Culture, which I thought was disgusting, am I allowed to say that? Is that it'll be developed as a heritage tourism source. Okay, heritage tourism is important and so on. But again, it has to be done in the right way. In the first place, that is a grave site of our Barbadian ancestors and has to be treated with the appropriate respect due, as you would expect your own family, parents, and so on, their grave sites to be respected. Doesn't matter that it's 300 years ago that it was done. It's still our family that has to be dealt with respect. And when you think about the missteps that have happened in that particular case, I'm sure they say the road to hell is paved with good intention. I'm sure the intentions were good. But you think about the missteps that were done there, and you come back to what we are doing here today with the Cecil Cyrus Museum, we have to be sure that each step we take in terms of presenting this, in terms of inviting the public to participate, to develop that community interaction, is done in a way that is respectful to the patients who donated that material in the first place, and is true to the wishes of Sir Cecil that this be an educational tool and be something that we should all value. So those are my elongate. See, I'm getting into my anecdotage already. So,
Good afternoon again, everyone. So my follow-up question then surrounds the issue of ownership. Who owns, these created artifacts? In the case of Sir Cecil, I know that there's a deed, right? A deed of gift. But as you mentioned, Prof. Cobley, that the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines had to write a permit for the specimens to be relocated to Barbados, because I assume Sir Cecil's wanted this museum to be for the people of St. Vincent, hence the reason why the Prime Minister would have had to give a permission. But then we go back to the issue of the specimens themselves and who they're taken from. Aren't they the rightful owners? And how do we address the issue of meeting their wishes and what they would expect to have been dealt with their preserved specimens? So the issue of ownership is something that has to be unpacked, I listened to Dean Harry, and we were communicating during the presentations, and I think it was Dr. Singh who said it. Historically, we have had a lot of specimens that have been created, but ethics is new. So what is the governing standard that we should prescribe to as it relates to creation within this current space? Should it be more about the legalities, or should it be about the ethics? And how can we address the unethical issues that may have taken place in the past to gather these samples? There are many, collections across the world, and I'm sure there have been many unethical practices in how those samples were collected. So there are many questions, but I'll throw it to the panel.
Thank you so much for that question, Dean Cohol. First of all, what ethics states is there's no ownership of this. So that statement is not, so it's not ownership, actually it is the custodian, right? The person who he's the keeper, he's the guardian of these, legacy specimens which are there. So there is no ownership. So it can be an institution. So the custodian is generally not one single person. So it's usually a group of individuals or the institution who is the, keeper, the guardian of these legacy collections. And apart from with regards to ethics of what the wishes would have been of that individual, there's a process which is known as proverbial research. So this proverbial research is a process of finding out the ownership. Where did the specimen originate from? What is the history of ownership of this collection? And once you get the history, you can trace the descendant community. So you contact, maybe if you are lucky to get in touch with the immediate family members, you can ask them what would be the wishes, or what the religious or the cultural practices would have been, or you go to the descendant community that is in the line of that individual, whoever is surviving. If still you don't get that information, then it would be the general community or the country, follow their practices, their cultural, practices, what would be in play. Thank you.
Also, I think that question is like two-pronged. So one, it's the ownership in terms of, as you mentioned, looking at the actual group of people, the geographical status. But then also when presenting, the presentation of these archives, who are you giving accreditation to? And I'm thinking in regards to answer, what I think you're trying to say, Damian, is that you would like to know how then to present these archives in a way that salute and celebrate the actual culture where they originated from, especially considering geographically it's moving across. So in that way, I think a statement needs to be attached to whatever. So if you have the Cecil Cyrus, you need to pronounce openly to the public that it's the St. Vincent people here that is being, it's sitting in Barbados, but we give ode to the St. Vincent people. So some kind of accolade, or homage needs to be given to the St. Vincent community so that them sitting in St. Vincent aren't cussing you as Barbadians. But wait, you take away something and have it, So you have to set up a situation where it's pronounced. And by having it pronounced, then that's where you fix the decolonization issue, and it doesn't look like as if you're owning and you're not giving, what's the word, accolades to the people who it originated from.
I was a little concerned when I saw something on cultural heritage being presented in medical science, but I'm very glad to hear that it was presented so sensitively. And I'm pleased to hear that so much thought and consideration was put into bringing this collection here. One of the things that is actually much more interesting to me, and I think much more interesting in this moment, is actually discussing all of these issues and interpreting those. So I was wondering to what extent that has been interpreted as part of the collection, because part of this discussion is educating the public around the idea of medical ethics and how communities should be in charge of their bodily autonomy, of their, where their genetic data goes. All of these things are part of this discussion. It's actually in the lineage of this discussion. So I'm just wondering to what extent that has been interpreted as part of the collection, one. And two, on the question of ownership, I know this has been something that has been discussed at the level of WIPO. So last May, I think in 2024, there was a discussion around genetic resources. And I wonder to what extent the public is aware of those kinds of issues too. Because when you think about specimens being taken, or remains being taken or sampled, et cetera, what is the life of ownership of that, and who does that redound to? So who does that come back to? Does it come back to communities as part of traditional knowledge, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, we haven't had that conversation, I think, and I wonder to what extent, if the medical faculty is now taking on some of these concerns, how we can bring more education about some of these discussions. I think it certainly bridges into Dr. Kohal's research. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
So there were a lot of, there were a couple of questions you have asked. So you wanted to know that who decides what happens to the DNA and how frequently these checks are done. So this is an ongoing process, actually. So every 5 to 10 years, you generally do a review of the state of your specimens, how they are in good state or they are in deteriorating state. Now, if you find that the specimens are in deteriorating state, that is the time when you decide what should be done. Should these be going for disposition, and how should these be, ideally disposed? So usually every specimen, comes with the tag with a history, the records. So you trace back to the records and see whether this is a bequeathed specimen, what was the consent given by this individual, what were the wishes of these individuals, whether I exhume these or whether I cremate these, right? So in case you don't have those records, as I said, that you trace back to the community. So this is what has been recently practiced by most of the well-known museums abroad, right? You have the Smithsonian Museum, which commonly practices this. So after a certain period of time, if the family or the descendant community is still there, you give back the remains or the ashes to the community to, do it accordingly, the last rite as per their culture or their wishes. In case if it is not available, then the custodian community or the institution has the rights to follow the last rites of that individual as per, whether what was his religion or what was his cultural belief, to follow that. And that's what most of the anatomy departments do, because we know that at UV Mona we have a large collection of bequeathed bodies. So at the end of dissection, what we have is remaining bones, right? So if it is an unclaimed body, we usually preserve the bones and use it for medical education. In case you have the family who's there, we return the remains to the family for cremation as per their wishes. In case you don't have anything you need to cremate, and then there's a specified area where you do it, as per the religion or the belief of that individual. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to jump on that if anybody else wants to go before me. No? Okay. So in regards, if we're looking at decolonization and from a decolonization perspective or lens, the ethical approach that you would start to consider around intellectual property, again, puts the community first. So again, the focus and the 4-point message that once you put out to the community that they are in charge, the agency structure has to be kind of realigned. And this is where you become radical, which is what I mentioned earlier. I don't know if any of you read Cecil Robinson's Creating a Radical Tradition, but if not, I know your medical students might not be interested in that, but humanitarian, I know you will. So honestly, the entire idea is that you are actually turning everything on its head. And you are giving back the power to the very people where it was taken away from. So terminologies, this gentleman, what's your last name again? Dr. Reid mentioned eloquently about the whole idea of how things are labeled. Cataloging is a big, massive issue in regards to restitution. If we're looking at the restitution factor, you have to start relabeling and categorizing things in a language that the community can understand. So again, you're stepping away from your medical jargons, yeah, which confuse people, yeah? So the idea is to really start inviting people in that can reinterpret that knowledge in a language that people can understand. And the only way to do that is to start having consistent convenings. And again, this is a radical approach. It's about the department really and your museum considering what type of space and what does this look like. So that when you come to the intellectual property, because you're having those spaces, it then becomes the ownership of the people, as opposed to, oh, I own this. No. The archive then becomes an open access educational space where every single conversation is recorded, so whoever wasn't there has access. And there's that continual digital data being prolonged and that continual conversation with the community being prolonged. I hope that helps.
I'm having incoherent thoughts, so. But I was looking at the medical students in the room. I know that you guys do a medical ethics course, or one or more than one. I think one of the things that, I'm a non-medic, so the medics here will have to tell me. One of the things that has changed over the years in the approach of doctors to medicine is to do with this whole issue of hierarchy that Connie was mentioning. The idea that the doctor is God and lays down the rules and so on, that idea, I hope, is through the Edos, as they say in Barbados. And it's much more the case now that the patient is a participant in their care, fully engaged in that relationship with the doctor. That's how it should be, at least, I hope. Now, the same thing to me, the whole point about medical ethics, I would think, is that you are trying to break down those notions of hierarchy. the assumption of superiority, for example, the assumption that some people have rights and others do not. You have to work on the basis that you're dealing with people in terms of equal power. Now, that's very difficult when you're dealing with medical specimens, because it's hard to think about those as people, as being derived from people. But if the museum is going to operate as we would like it to operate, as shining a light on medical practice and the good that medicine does for humankind, then you have to address that issue of how do you empower the viewer to see themselves and their future and their health and prosperity and so on in what they are viewing. Now, I don't know if the anatomists, of which we have several here, have a view on it, but when you're presenting an anatomical sample or whatever in a class, when you're dissecting or whatever, how do you present the humanity of that sample to your students? I'd be interested to know.
Thank you, Prof, for bringing up that issue. And I have a lot of my students over here. Especially while dealing with human specimens, we take extreme care that these belong to a human being. And our students know the importance of human specimens, not more than any other, campus students, because we have maintained one cadaver from the year 2008. And hats off to our students that till date, that specimen is in good condition to go on teaching for another year. So you can imagine from the year 2008, we are in 2025. Hats off to our students. They would have maintained the state of that cadaver. They would have taken care of it, given respect to it, that it is maintained in a good state till date. Though we require new specimens, it is because we generate that kind of knowledge in our students to give respect as if this is a living individual. They don't call it as a cadaver. They name it as Mr. Bob or, Mr. John or something, give a name to it. So a lot of this is there. And also, it is the duty of the teacher as well to, the lecturer as well to introduce to this humanity point to the students. For example, some dissection halls in Japan, before you enter those dissection halls, you enter that hall as if you are entering a prayer room. They maintain that kind of, cleanliness, that kind of spirituality in that area because the body has been bequeathed by somebody. And it's not easy to donate your body for dissection, for medical study or, educational purposes. So we do emphasize that to our students. And I can, vet it, each one of these individuals who's sitting over here, I know, what is their thinking towards it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, we've had a short but certainly thought-provoking and stimulating discussion and in terms of the question and answer. So I will give my summary of the presentation very shortly. But before I go into that, extrapolating from the last point about who has ownership, certainly St. Vincent is just a couple minutes away from us. Certainly with our policies as we set up our museum, we must have policies in place for when claims come. Someone comes and says, this is the specimen from my relative, and I can give you DNA evidence, I can give you anecdotal evidence, I have letters, etc., for when that person had surgery, and I can give you community evidence. So certainly, going forward, we need to have policies in place to how we manage each claim and request for specimens on a case-by-case basis, without a doubt. So in summary, medical museums can engage in ethical display of human remains and images by doing robust de-identification procedures and providing context for every single item in the connection. And again, extend this ethical involvement by having informed consent practices in terms of the acquisition and involving the community in the display and educating them. And in this way, we will continue to have an impactful legacy in our collections and hopefully add to them in the future. I thank you all for participating and listening in the discussion, and now I turn it over for the vote of thanks.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I would like to acknowledge both deans, Dean Cohol and Dean Harry, that were here. Professor Emeritus Cobley, Dr. Singh, Dr. Reid, Dr. O'Shea, Dr. Skeets, Miss Bell, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, faculty, students, thank you very much. Today's event was part of numerous activities related to the launch of the Cecil Cyrus Caribbean Museum of Medical History. During this panel, we had discussions at length regarding the nuances of ethics in displaying human remains, the importance of contextualization and viewing specimens with empathy, the cultural and spiritual significance, the role of informed consent, and the role of destigmatizing organ donation and breaking the hierarchy of knowledge exchange and sharing. I stand here today to express my heartfelt thanks to all of those who made this event possible. I'll first like to thank the family of Sir Cecil Cyrus for their generous donation of the timeless artifacts to create this museum. I'll also like to thank and extend my gratitude to the panelists for this thought-provoking and educational discussion. Your expertise in this area is greatly appreciated. I'd like to thank our academic, administrative, and technical staff of the Faculty of Medical Sciences and the overall university who have been instrumental in today's proceedings. Special mention to Dr. Singh, Dr. Greaves, Dr. Harewood, the FMS Projects and Planning Committee, and Mr. Brian Elcock for your coordination and contributions to today. I'll also like to express my appreciation for the media, especially Marcoms, for covering today's event. Your attention to detail and the coverage helps both the museum as well as the wider Faculty of Medical Sciences. And to our guests who have taken time out of their busy schedules to be here today, we have visiting persons from outside of Barbados. We have medical students. Your presence here has added an extra sparkle to today's discussion, and I thank you for being here. And finally, I would like to thank each and every one of you for your support and participation to make this event a success. Your contributions have not gone unnoticed, and I am greatly appreciative for you all. In conclusion, I would like to say thank you for this event. It would not have been possible without any of you. And on behalf of the Faculty of Medical Sciences, thank you.